in this season finale.
God does not exist, just so simple as that, honestly.
Life is ultimately meaningless if God does not exist.
For freedom of expression to exist, one, all of us must hold an opinion.
Why do you want to offend? Why?
Why should we go to 15% if we are not using the 4%?
How do we achieve universal health coverage? Are we the first people to go into universal health coverage? No, we are not.
Do Kenyans really value integrity?
Criminal gangs are associated with border borders. It's a pain and misery for them and their families.
Is our reading culture dying, or is it as vibrant as it has ever been?
I view social media more than just a conglomerate of social media platforms.
I would have wanted a better Kenya.
This is good for debate.
Pertinent issues, hot debates, asking the big questions of life. We ask, does God exist? Let it be resolved. Social media is doing more harm than good to our society. The government's investment in universal health coverage should focus on primary health care, not secondary and tertiary care. Kenyans don't value integrity. Border borders should be banned from Nairobi City. The right to free speech includes the right to offend. Let it be resolved. Africa still needs foreign aid to achieve her full socio-economic potential. Our reading culture is dying. Our democracy is up for sale. We sought to achieve a clear understanding of the challenges affecting our society and the pathways and solutions needed to overcome them. In this season finale, we bring you nits and bits of the exciting debate motions and questions we have tackled on the show. First we ask, is our democracy up for sale?
We start with you, Benji, your 1 minute opening remarks.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you to the panel. The motion today says democracy is on sale in Kenya. And I absolutely agree that we have a problem. Democracy is on sale in Kenya. Almost 60 years after independence, the evidence is rife, is self-evident for all to see. Our people are poorer. Our markets are collapsing left and right. We are running an economy that is good for the top 2% and terrible for the rest of, including taxpayers. We have wanton looting and destruction of forests, looting of public money. All this is because when democracy is on sale, when democracy has not worked, you then have governance that is skewed, that is defined by ethnicity, that is defined by mediocrity, where we shun those that are sharp and that are merited, that can bring solutions, and we embrace those that are corrupt, those that are willing to do voter bribery and what have you. And in so doing, then the broken democracy manifests itself in bad governance.
The original creators of democracy had only one goal in mind, and that is to place a people within a society at the fulcrum of control and management of legislation and governance. Key point, people. Now, democracy, therefore, at the most elementary level, refers to a system that champions for the development and the welfare of a people, and that which is organized in a manner that enhances legitimacy of governments within the framework of justice and freedom.
We can talk all this lofty stuff, but the fact is that killer squads that do not respect the Constitution, that have no regard for the rule of law, that have no regard even during recruitment for meritocracy, those are the realities of the Kenya we have today. And until we are willing to speak to that, Joe, and to fix that, then we can continue to write reports and shelve them. It won't change.
Ours has been a positive trajectory from independence to now. We have had tests within our democratic system. 1982 coup, repeal of that made Kenya, 1982 coup that made Kenya a de jure state, one-party state. An improvement in, that is 1982. 1992, an improvement by repeal of Section 2A. 2007, post-election violence happened. After that, we did a promulgation of, we promulgated the new constitution that has given us devolved system of government. It means more power is down to the people.
It is such a conundrum. It is such a dilemma. You know, which comes before the other, the chicken or the egg? I do agree with my opponent, Ella, when he says that it is mostly a positive trajectory. I agree with that. But this is only owing to the fact that the people of Kenya are very resilient, very tough, and very hardworking. Otherwise, the country would have collapsed under all this assault of, you know, what he calls a struggle that we've been struggling. But looting is not a struggle.
Democracy is simply the exercise of people giving their own government legitimacy. Now, legitimacy means we have a government in place that has been voted by a majority, which is 50+1. We have a judiciary in place that those aggrieved within elections can go to. Kenyans can seek justice through the judicial system. It dispenses justice in all its forms.
My question goes to Ella. Ella, you speak of a progressive constitution as an illustration of a functional democracy. And I think, don't you think you're speaking from both sides of your mouth when we point, you know, the constitution as progressive within our region, while we only partially implement what works for the minority of the people? I'll give an example. We've had conversations around the two-third gender rule for the longest time, but since it doesn't serve a particular group of people, we choose not to implement that. So don't you think that's an oxymoron?
I will say that Kenya has been ranked among the most improved in closing the gender gap, with a gender gap index score of 73% and maintaining position 9 out of 36 nations that were studied. So I think we are trying.
2 out of the 3 jury members are in support of the motion. 1 of the jury members is against.
Then we sought to find out, is social media doing more harm than good?
Social media is just a reflection of human behavior.
Correct.
So it's going to be a heavy thing, a reflection of human behavior. And one thing that people would say is regulation, which I'm scared to do, because regulation, that incorporates the government, which the government just uses mass media already right now. You just spin your narrative, and that would be sticking to that end of things. I view social media more than just a conglomerate of like social media platforms. It's a little bit more than that. It's more than Twitter, it's more than Facebook, it's more than YouTube. It's about you and me. You who's watching, and even us here. How are we able to even come together, even actually merge ideas, even how even parents, even maybe Fred's parents can even relate with this when they come out there and say, hey, watoto siku hizi, all they do is look at phones. Relax. These are different ways of expression.
You are unable to understand the debate. The debate is saying it's doing more harm than good. We are not saying social media is bad. We are now just comparing about the advantages and the disadvantages. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages. I'm on social media just for one reason, to keep in touch with the population that I'm unable to keep in touch one-on-one and get news. That's the reason why I'm on social media.
So it has been of use to you to some extent. I mean, it's opened up your eyes to different ways of
mindset. Of course, it's useful, but the disadvantages outweigh the advantages of social media.
Social media is a different way of even communicating, and we're actually incorporating different techniques within our ability to communicate because it enhances communication. Just like how when you incorporate some new electronic within your life, there's always a negative backlash. For example, the TV. When the TV was brought in, they would say, where if you sit close to the TV, you're gonna go blind and you're gonna lose your eyesight. Oh, wapi. The thing is, even when it actually happens, when you incorporate something new, the older generation always has a slower time to adjust and include it within their lives because of one thing that they fear: irrelevancy. And I totally understand where you're coming from, because the key thing is when actually now you come from a place of you're now seeing kids behave differently from the way that you actually were seeing it. You're not seeing how that change of behavior is leading to them having an enhanced level of communication, and how these kids are now be able to express themselves through areas like content creation.
Okay, to you, Fred, social media has democratized media access. So even people who would otherwise not have gotten a voice have a voice.
True.
Is that not a good thing?
On media access, it is a good thing.
That there are voices that would otherwise not be amplified, and even initiatives, causes that people wouldn't know about if we didn't have social media.
Francis Mbuga, in his story book called Aminata, he points out that the world is one big chameleon. Today you find a tall tree here, tomorrow you find a tall building. Truly the world is changing, camouflaging like a chameleon very fast. And we must accept the fact that social media has given at least people a platform to communicate.
Your mind always gives you a chance to choose the positive and the negative.
Yes.
So why would you say that it's actually those small negatives, which I feel like they're minute, they can be handled. They're making social media look all this bad.
You're calling this minute. You're calling the future of your kids minute, my friend. No. Social media has its own advantages, has its own disadvantages. But my point is the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, because on what illicit content has been put on social media.
Social media is something that has come with the current times that we're living in right now, and I believe that you cannot have your cake and eat it. At the end of the day, you need to realize that with the good that is coming, there's always bad. And how do we curb these challenges?
Up next came another question. Does God exist?
Like Friedrich Nietzsche, I will attempt to kill God.
Life is ultimately meaningless if God does not exist.
The Greek philosopher Epicurus also laid down the logical arguments from evil as follows. If an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God exists, then evil does not, which makes a lot of sense, because God is considered to be the source of good, as you've heard from my good friend. He is omnipotent, omnibenevolent. But there is evil in the world. Therefore, logically, an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God cannot logically exist.
To my surprise, he says that there's a logical contradiction between believing in God and believing in evil. Atheists have tried, but nobody has ever been able to demonstrate what that contradiction is. There are many people who are superb scientists who are also followers of Christ or believers in other religions as well. So it has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. It's just what the facts happen to be. And given the time in which we are living today, this is an amazing time to ask that question, because the science itself that is pointing us to the fact that the universe began to exist, that is very, very complicated. And that's, Harrison keeps asking, how do we go from there to a creator? And I think he missed the point that I tried to make, which was, if we ask ourselves that question, how do we move from a universe that began to exist and that's so complicated to a creator, we have to ask ourselves the question, what kind of an entity would bring this type of universe into existence? And I said it has to be immaterial because it created matter and space. It must be timeless because it existed without time. It must be enormously powerful, very intelligent, and it must be personal because it could make decisions.
Most people who I have had with this kind of reasoning, especially scientists on all that, yeah, they usually base this whole concept on different things. Like, for example, you mentioned the Big Bang Theory and evolution. But what I'm hearing you say is, and you can please clear this for me, is you're not for that as well, right? We don't have to have a first cause to anything. So in other words, things just happened. There was no evolution, there was no God, there was no Big Bang Theory, it just happened.
Believers in God will always tell you, you know what? We have to have something that created everything. We have to have something that created the world, the universe, the oxygen we breathe. And so I'm trying to invite you to the possibility that maybe that was not the case. That maybe there was no first cause. Maybe things have been happening all through time, so that the argument of first cause has a problem. It is only making one assumption and not the other. It's really as simple as that. As to the Big Bang, scientists have already demonstrated there was a Big Bang. It happened. I am a believer in the Big Bang. Evolution, it has been demonstrated it happened. I know evolution is a fact, but that does not then contradict what I'm saying. That when you go back to the beginnings of the universe, I'm welcoming you to open up your thoughts and imagine that maybe there was no first cause.
So, sorry, Harrison, maybe just if you believe in the Big Bang, doesn't that mean then the universe was created at some point?
No, there has to I'm arguing that the Big Bang is not the first thing that happened before the universe came into existence.
Everyone is entitled to their, convictions. Even the scriptures tell us not to judge anyone. But the only thing we can do is to, allow conversations to continue.
And we see people calling us devil worshippers. We are not devil worshippers. We are just people who have rejected the idea that God exists. So we welcome all sorts of criticism because that is the country we live in. That is a country that we need to allow, that people are supposed to have different ideas.
Now, 12 years since the enactment of the 2010 Constitution, are we at a vantage point to review what has worked and what has not worked up to this point?
Let it be resolved. The 2010 Constitution is ripe for review.
My position is that the law must be able to manifest itself. It must be able to exhibit the spirit of the people. And that codifying a law in a rigid way is only defeating the purpose for which that particular law was legislated. My position, therefore, is that the Constitution must be as flexible as it ought to be to ensure that it meets the needs and the wishes of the people. In my submissions, I'll be relying on the doctrines placed down by Savin. Savin was one of the jurists. He dictated that the law must grow with the growth of the society and must attain the strength of the society. And at a particular point, if the society so feels so compelled to amend that particular law, then the society is at liberty to make sure that their wishes and aspirations are therefore met. And therefore that cannot be effected in the situation whereby the law is so rigid. I propose that the 2010 Constitution is ripe for amendment.
My learned friend seems to anchor his argument that we need to amend this Constitution purely because of the question of representation. Ironically, he goes back to the same Constitution and argues that the population quota formula used in Ruiru is not in compliance with the Constitution, meaning he's in agreement that in fact the Constitution has given a scientific formula of ensuring that there is representation, and that is anchored under Article 89 of our Constitution, which clearly states that the role of reviewing boundaries, the role of reviewing the population quotas and establishing constituencies is the mandate of IBC.
We all know that the 1963 Constitution was a Lancaster process, and it completely kept out the Kenyans. And therefore, it came to a situation whereby we were being governed by a document that we never participated in it. And the purpose for which a constitution is enacted is to ensure that it governs three fundamental pillars of any nation. The first pillar is the political pillar. The second pillar is the economic pillar. And the third pillar is the social pillar. So at any given time, because the society is a progressive society, it must then be able to have a situation to evaluate the document and the law that is governing them. The 1963 Constitution did not provide a situation whereby Kenyans were to be granted an opportunity to evaluate the document. It therefore became necessary that we enacted the 2010 Constitution. The 2010 Constitution was enacted with the idea of the history of this country. And that is why Savin is saying, Savin says that a document, the law that is enacted, must contemplate the history and the culture of the people. And why Savin is saying so is because he realizes that the society is progressive.
A constitution is a document that is meant to last, not for eternity, but it's supposed at least to give us a roadmap to get us where we want to be. So are we still within that roadmap? Are we still within that framework? Because we are talking about a document that is only 12 years old, a document that was conceived, a document that was established deliberately by the people of Kenya, Why was it established? It is because the previous document was not working for us. It was not sustainable. It was not bearable. So for my learned friend to convince us that this is the moment, he needs to show us one thing, that the document we have is no longer bearable, that the document we have is no longer sustainable, but as long as he has not done that, then he cannot purport that we are in a constitutional moment where we need to amend this constitution.
How do you resolve the issue of amendment? So just distinguish review from amendment or relate the two.
Well, if I would begin then by relating the two, when the moderator made his submissions, opening remarks, he clearly pointed out to very specific issues like the BBI question. And the BBI question was entirely about the amendment. So I got the impression that in this debate and the brief I had gotten, we were to review, or we were submitting on the question of amendments of the document. And that is why my submissions details extensively on the question of the amendment of the Constitution. Even then I may be wrong with my understanding and the manifestation I have created, is then the question is, why are we reviewing if we are not amending?
My argument is based on the fact that when you look at our institutions, prior to 2017, most of our institutions did not even know what role they were playing. The Supreme Court, for example, the judiciary, they were not clear on their mandate. But when we look at how, for example, an institution like the judiciary has been able to come out, claim their space, you will know that we are actually now starting to implement the Constitution when the judiciary is able to stand against the executive and make a judgment that is sober, that is independent, then you know we are on the right track. So let us give our institutions that opportunity to implement this Constitution. Let us give the judiciary ample time to interpret this Constitution and ensure that it works for everyone.
Africa is in need of foreign aid. Africa does not need foreign aid.
You cannot ban borders.
Are we the first people to go into universal health coverage? No, we are not.
So do Kenyans really value integrity?
Welcome back to the debate. A quick reminder for you to engage with us on these debates.
Africa is in need of foreign aid. Africa does not need foreign aid.
You cannot ban borders.
Are we the first people to go into universal health coverage? No, we are not.
So do Kenyans really value integrity?
It is not that Kenyans do not value integrity, it's just that they do not see integrity in the places in which they wanted to see them. And essentially those were public offices. State offices are great examples of how we have allowed essentially state capture to take place. Kenyans value integrity, they just don't value state capture.
The fact that we are brought together to form a state, but not a nation, and we look at the state as an opportunity to steal and to plunder and to pilfer in the same way our colonialists also did in terms of how they created Kenya. And so therefore, those who are hailed and exalted in public service are those who seem to have gotten the most out of the state. In fact, recently, when the cabinet secretaries were being vetted, you would actually see they were not necessarily the most poor. And the association is largely because they have been able to work for government for many years, not private sector. So that tells you really the people you look up to, even when you look at those who come to look for political positions, and I've been in parliament for 10 years, are former MDs, of corporations, people, bankers, or whatever, those kind of people. They are the ones who can easily line up, the electorate, hired, crowds, and eventually they end up winning at the ballot. And we do not have a very good threshold. In fact, the best way to lose an election is to have high integrity.
what has just happened is actually an example of corruption, which is my opponent had a certain number of minutes to speak, and he has overrun into my minutes. And I think the first thing to note is that, you know, we see these things. As Kenyans, we see when people abuse their office and their time. We just don't have the capacity.
Doesn't that prove his case then, that we don't value integrity?
No, we do, because I rise to correct him, right? And everybody in this room knew and saw the sign saying your time is up, but he continued to proceed. So we notice these things, and that's the first thing that demonstrates to me that there is a sense of decency still left in this country.
Integrity in Kenya really is a foreign concept, and it has not even helped to have chapter 6, a whole chapter of the Constitution, as to assuade people to live up to the expectations that when they have integrity, they stand a higher chance of leading this country or actually leading prosperous lives.
Do Kenyans feel a sense of ownership in the country to the extent where they will say, I will defend my country, I will defend the Constitution, I will defend, or do Kenyans just feel disenfranchised?
If you care about your own brother or sister, you will be more democratic, and that people will feel like they have a fair chance at their franchise or Project Kenya.
That, for me, is really kind of the choices that Kenyans take in the entire time. And depending on your power and your privilege, you take bigger risks, or your boldness, you take bigger risks, or if you don't feel safe, you take smaller risks. And I think that is what my worthy opponent is just not seeing, that there is a heterogeneity, there is a diversity of Kenyans.
Now, in 2018, the government launched a pilot scheme for universal health coverage. 4 years later, and with many lessons learned and a new government in place, there's a renewed sense of purpose on delivering on UHC. But one thing is clear, it will cost a lot of money to roll out. And as it is, the health sector is already relatively underfunded. So what should the government's priorities be? Where should the government direct its efforts and investment in the drive towards achievement of universal health coverage?
Simplified version of primary, secondary, and tertiary is this. The first person you meet, the first point of contact when you go to a hospital is the primary healthcare person. When you have a common cold, when you have a cough, when you have a flu, that is the person you see. But when you are really sick and you need care and you have to go to a hospital for admission, for surgery, for cancer treatment, then you are moving into the space of secondary and tertiary healthcare. And my view is that this is the one area where families face the greatest hardships, and this is when the government must step in.
Primary healthcare is a step ahead and is asking the question, why don't we prevent those events from getting to the critical level where you need tertiary healthcare? Why am I saying this? If you look at Kenya today and ask yourself, what kills people? There are top 10 diseases that kill people are diseases like HIV, malaria, diarrheal diseases, pneumonia in children. All these diseases, 80–90% of them can be prevented and sufficiently treated at primary healthcare level. So the risk that you'll get someone advancing to the point of where they need tertiary healthcare is significantly low if we actually invest in primary healthcare. And ultimately, the question you ask yourself is, what's government's mandate? The debate today is about government. What's your job as government? Your job as government is to protect the people you serve using the taxpayers that you've collected from them. What does that mean? It means you've got to take that tax money and ask yourself, you're pulling this money into one basket and you're going to use it for everybody. You've got to start with what is most equitable, most rewarding as an investment, and what gives the majority of the people access to healthcare. And I'm here today to argue that primary healthcare is the way to go.
The pilot scheme that was undertaken in 2018, and I believe it's still ongoing, has it focused largely on primary to the exclusion of secondary care?
No, indeed, the pilot scheme actually covered all cases. In fact, you could walk into a public facility and receive surgery. You could walk into a public facility and receive primary health care. And that is essentially what it should be. The only challenge is implementation was not done the right way. And so you had an announcement, but you weren't prepared. So you'd find that the healthcare workers in those facilities were stretched. Provisions were limited, supplies were non-existent, and as a result, a program that was good in intention failed at implementation. Now, we need not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can actually look at what didn't work in that situation and come back. Have a UHC system that looks at primary healthcare, secondary healthcare, tertiary healthcare, and in fact, Kenya should take its position in quaternary healthcare, which is when we begin to innovate and provide new solutions that can spread across this world.
We also resolved the motion border borders should be banned in Nairobi CBD.
You cannot ban borders. Banning borders in our great city means banning thousands of job opportunities. It means ripping out billions of shillings from the economy. And it's denying many hustlers from a reliable and affordable transport solution. It's simply a sector that cannot be waved away.
I'm not whitewashing the contribution of border to the GDP of this country, but I'm simply saying there are areas they should not be allowed into. And one of them is the CBD, because you cannot allow such a group that has no respect for human life, has no respect even for their own lives, has no respect for the rule of law, has no respect for the image that they portray of this country across the globe, to operate in the city, which is the prime hub of the East African community.
Dr. Kivoi, is it an issue of, because 2015, from the CBD, there was that ban that you mentioned, I think 2018 again, which speaks to an inability to enforce. So is it an issue of enforcement? And in your view, do you think there's enforcement that has failed, and hence maybe the attention should be on what more can be done to formalize the sector, enforce the traffic laws that are required, as opposed to outright banning?
The problem is not enforcement. The problem is lack of political will, because borders are a huge voting bloc. So politicians don't want to lose those votes. So they allow them to engage in lawlessness, because they know that when voting comes, they'll go for them. The question I would want to ask our jurors and my colleague here, why are we going to make laws that we know we are not going to enforce? If we make laws, then let's enforce them. Had these laws been enforced in 2015, after the county government came up with that law, then we would not even be talking about the issue of chaos within our roads in the city.
We do need reform, we do need regulation, and the industry needs to evolve. But if you're talking about a ban, we're talking about huge financial consequences. What does it mean socially? It's become too integrated into our culture. And until the infrastructure is sorted out, I don't think a ban will work. Let's talk about tweaking the system.
Now, should African nations continue to be dependent on foreign aid?
If you say that Kenya and Africa don't need foreign aid, then Africa will continue to be poor. Actually, the data by World Bank states that by 2030, chances are that Africa might actually be on the percentage of 90% poor.
Between 1970 and 1998, when aid for Africa was highest, that is when our challenges began, and poverty levels rose from 11% to 6%.
Even America and developed countries are also depending, to some extent, those not compared to Africa, on foreign aid. And this is a globalization era where mutuality relationship is required and has been demonstrated. I strongly believe that the concept of dumping in the pretext of donation and foreign aid can be regulated by good policies. Who has refused Africans to remain firm with their policies and say no to dumping, no to manipulation? It is our own misgiving, it is our own problems that we need to sort out, and not to put missiles on the foreign aid, because the concept, we have evidence. Look at Rwanda. Rwanda, Mozambique, and Ethiopia. You can check in data on record. They have developed so fast because of foreign aid. What is the difference? It's the management and stewardship and leadership. They are not attacking the foreign aid, but they are saying, let it come because we need it. That's a reality. So on our side, we need to practice good leadership, good governance, but not to put missiles on foreign aid.
What aid does is that it comes with conditions. And so aid skews your policy direction in terms of how you think as a country and as a continent. So you abandon your own ideas about what you need to do to grow and start embracing what people think is important for you. What other countries need is not necessarily what Africa needs. What Europe needs is not what Africa needs. So when you skew your policies to the direction of what the aid, where aid is coming from, then you start focusing on the wrong things. If you're living in 2022 and someone is telling you to focus on things that are 1960, then that is part of where challenges are. Building the capacity of Africans to deal with their own problems. It's what I meant. So we do not need someone to come and give us aid and give us conditions that are skewed to their favor. So we need to fix our own problems, fix our own resources, deal with our own resources, build our own capacity, and do partnerships instead.
I don't want us to be lied to or cheated that we're poor. We are not poor as a continent. What we have is poverty of what? Ideas. Okay. So we need to get to learn that aid does not help the continent. What we do is to borrow and then steal.
So the conclusion could come like how we can restructure our foreign policy to make sure that we are good negotiators when we are dealing with foreign governments.
We then asked, is our reading culture dying?
The modern man and woman is entertained more than he is informed. We are living in a time and a period where we are all encompassed in a loop, in a time warp, in a silo of mass delusion, mass entertainment. That's where we are. The reading culture is dying, if not dead already.
You cannot then conclude that because people are using phones, they are no longer reading. Indeed, we know that the Kenyans on Twitter is one of the most vibrant groups or communities within our country. And Twitter is primarily a medium that where people use written form of communication. So I will say actually that if you look at Kenyan on Twitter alone, that actually is an indication that Kenyans are still reading a lot and they're also writing a lot. It's just that the medium has moved to the mobile phone.
I am tickled, indeed, when I am told that Twitter is reading. 140 characters at best, and a thread at most. There was a study done last year to evaluate how many hours are spent in the entire world by different cultures and how long they take to study. The World Culture Score Index, in the top 30 countries, Kenya was not there. There's no matter of putting makeup on the pig that's going to make the pig any more beautiful. I'm sorry.
The reading culture in Kenya is alive and well. We just need to continue encouraging reading culture and also producing books that can actually appeal to Kenyans.
I'm still not so clear on what the reading culture is because we tend to reduce reading to studying only to achieve things like development, to achieve things like mental acuity and intellectual discourse. But in my view, if you're talking about a reading culture and what are the metrics for it, it will be reading hours not spent in class, maybe for example to study exams, attendance in festivals and in libraries, literary festivals, translations, and how our books are faring out there in the world. Those are just some examples. Will it be that we are just focusing on books and not the platforms that these books are being released to and how people access them? For example, you can access them through magazines, through newspapers, as you said. We can also access them through online digital platforms like Kindle. Are we now reducing this reading culture to actual books being read in class?
You have asked an excellent question. What is a reading culture? Number one, reading culture is not the same as studying books in class in order to achieve certain academic qualifications. That's not what we're talking about. Because if that was the case, as I began by saying, the literacy rate in this country has grown from 20% in 1963 to 81+% in 2022. So that's not the question. The question is that do people read as a matter of culture? Now, let me answer that question in a prism. The most sold book in the history of the world is the Bible, right? But if you look at the number of Kenyans who are involved in cultic, non-biblical, pseudo-Christian religions, it would tell you that those Christians, 80% of whom constitute the population of Kenya, do not even read the book that is most available. It is provided free even by the Gideon Society. What is the problem? The problem then is that the Kenyan human does not take time to read beyond the class hours. Why? It is not because they do not have a dispensable income. They do. If you look at the furor that was there because clubs are being closed, you realize Kenyans can afford 300 shillings per beer and take 10 of them in a sitting, but they will not take 500 shillings to buy a book. And that tells you that there's a big problem with the culture of reading.
So it is actually true that Kenyans have a reading culture, but you must write a book that they can relate to, a book that they find useful, a book that they can enjoy reading. And it's because of that that my book actually dislodged an international bestseller by James Clear called Atomic Habits. So the reading culture in Kenya is alive and well. We just need to continue encouraging reading culture and also producing books that can actually appeal to Kenyans.
This is no insult to the thousands, not millions, of Kenyans who read. It is instead a challenge, because even if you got 1 million Kenyans reading, adults, there's still 19 million non-reading Kenyans. It does not matter how you cut those statistics. They do not bode well in the favor of the argument that Kenya has a reading culture.
Finally,
does freedom of speech include the right to offend?
I want to start by indicating that there can't be freedom of expression if we don't think about it in totality. That freedom of expression includes speech acts that will praise, speech acts that will disturb, and speech acts that would offend. An example would be, if you are a teacher and you had scripts to mark, do you take back scripts that say every student passed? Or would you mark and say there are some who passed and there are some who failed? And there are some who did not attempt the exam. If you are telling their parents, some parents will be shocked. Some will be disturbed because they paid fees. What do you do as a teacher if you only say all the students passed? You'll be lying. So inherent in freedom of expression is the right to offend, the right to disturb, and the right to shock.
What is offensive is unlawful. Therefore, it is unlawful for you to have offensive speech in free speech. I mean, I don't think how it is so clear now that you've said it. You should have ended the debate right there. The right to free speech includes the right to offend. No, actually it doesn't, because you cannot, one, insult people. You cannot abuse people. You cannot threaten people. That is our law. This is our act, NCAC Act of 2008. It is so clear. So if what is offensive is unlawful, it is right here.
Yes, our constitution spells out the issues. Anything that may be offensive or offending and disturbing but falls outside that, like your lecturer's criticism, which brings back your thesis all in red and tells you to do it, yeah, is bad, but it is lawful, so it is protected.
What is offensive is unlawful, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what you said. I think that's the end of the debate then.
Yeah,
right,
but
there.
the law,
what is offensive,
the law has told you
is
3 or 4
unlawful.
things that are unlawful.
Okay, so it has said...
Stick to them.
Yes, I'm going to stick to them. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And actually, that should be the end of the debate. So the 4 things, okay? The 4 things: propaganda to war, incitement, hate speech, or advocacy for hatred. Now, that's a constitution. Yeah. You always need a bill to enact or enforce or implement a constitution, right?
So I want us to understand that the concept of right to offend is tied to the concept of saying yes and no as speech acts. So the law does not permit people to be tortured so that they just are praise singers. The law allows them to say, this I do not agree with, this is nice, this is friendly, this is beautiful, but this is ugly. When they say that, the recipients of the speech acts are shocked, are disturbed, but that is what the law permits.
There is nowhere, whether you're Muslim or Christians, where our good books allows you to offend people. As a matter of fact, it tells you to go the opposite way. We're told when somebody hits you on this other cheek, turn the other cheek. You're supposed to walk in love. So legally speaking, ethically speaking, morally speaking, there is no room, and you can never argue that the right of free speech is the right to offend. It's not in law, it's not ethical, it's not moral.
Not everyone should keep quiet just in the fear of offending someone, you know. Everyone should have the freedom of speech, and at the same time, on the other hand, there are the legal parameters that are set. The drafters of our constitution and Article 33 gives some limitations to the freedom of speech. You should not do propaganda, you should not do hate speech, you should not incite people to violence. I believe those are the various thresholds that should determine what should I say, what should I not say.
I've seen the different sides of argument. One was arguing majorly based on the constitution, the other one was arguing philosophically, and it's a good conversation now being introduced to our public and even to our TVs, that our generation can be able to see the different side of politics, different sides of people bringing opinions and not disagreeing. So for me, the whole experience was actually educative, but apart from being educative, it opened me to another reality, that as Africa now we are ready for such conversation, and that shows that our democracy is even maturing.
I'd like to thank the KTN team for inviting me to participate in this debate.
Thank you, panelists, debaters, for such persuasive arguments.
Thank you to our location host, the Norfolk Hotel, the KTN team behind this production, and of course you, the viewer, for staying tuned and participating in this conversation. My name is Joe Monene.
Well, that's it for Season 2 of We Debate. A reminder that you can catch all these exciting debates on the KTN Home YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.